In this video, we will talk about organizational change. This video is based on Chapter 8 in Lunenburg and Ornstein's Educational Administration Concepts and Practices, published in 2011 by Cengage Learning. We will begin the video by discussing forces for change. Then we will proceed to talking about resistance to change. We will discuss then overcoming resistance to change and managing change. And we will conclude by talking about organizational development. So schools and really any organizations, but schools specifically face following forces for change. The first is accountability, right? So if maybe a couple of decades ago, accountability of schools was more like input kind of based, it was enough to have clean and nice buildings, disciplined students, and things like that. Now this is not enough, so the focus of accountability shifted towards outputs, right? So the stakeholders are demanding, adequate performance, academic performance, test scores, graduation rates, and maybe even college enrollment rates, right? So accountability is shifting, and it is a very powerful force for change. The next force for change is changing demographics. So in the US, the demographics is shifting toward, and the minority population percentages are increasing, right? In other countries, the number of young people is increasing possibly, right? And there are more and more demands for high quality schooling. So the next force for change is staffing shortages. If maybe some time ago there was a steady inflow of qualified, talented teachers into the educational system, this is not the case. More recently, there's high turnover, there's lack of qualified teachers, and various administrators, even government on the government level, are trying to implement various policies to address the staffing shortage, but definitely they are a powerful force for change in schools. Next is changing technology and knowledge explosion, right? Things are changing, new technology keeps appearing, so that changes schools, right? Requires them to change, learn new things, right? Knowledge explosion, new things keep appearing, new knowledge, and that requires schools to adapt and learn how to teach all those, exploding knowledge around us. Finally, a very powerful force for change is processes and people. When processes change and people change, that usually involves, a requirement for change. And any organization and schools in particular, they frequently resist change, right? And resistance can come from several sources, right? The first, very often, is interference with need fulfillment. If a change or reform prevents people from fulfilling their needs, which were fulfilled earlier before the reform, then people will resist, right? The next source is fear of the unknown. People usually have invested a lot of time and effort into, developing things, developing systems, learning things the way they do them now. So the new things come with the fear, right? People are scared of all the work and uncertainty involved with the new reforms. Next, it's possible that threats to power and influence may force people to resist the change, right? People don't want to lose the kind of influence that they have built over maybe a long period of time, even, right? Next, knowledge and skill obsolescence, right? If the new thing you know is it is such kind of thing that makes someone's skills obsolete or knowledge obsolete, that really makes people resist and defend themselves, right? Organizational structure might actually be a source of resistance, right? If there are many levels in the organization, right, or if one level doesn't, it kind of filters the reforms and kind of doesn't allow doesn't provide enough information to the next level, then just the structure itself can be a hindrance to reforms. Next, limited resources, right? So any change, any reform requires time and effort and qualified people to do things that need to be changed. So often limited resources. So there are schools that might be willing to change, but they don't have enough time or do not have enough money or do not have enough qualified people to implement those changes. And finally, in some contexts, collective bargaining agreements, and especially in the context of the U.S., is a source of resistance, right? For obvious reasons. How can school administrators overcome resistance to change? Well, there are several possible approaches that could be used. The first is participation. If people participate in designing the reform, if they participate in, uh, you know, um, in the development of the new change, then they are more likely to not to resist it. Next is communication. Clear communication at all levels, many times, constantly explaining the reform, explaining all of the things that are going to happen, and talking to people that can help. That is usually very helpful. The next is support, right? Providing support to people, so that they can, enter the change without the having to compromise their needs fulfillment, or maybe without being afraid and other things. That is really important, and that can help overcome resistance. Rewards, when people understand that change is coming for sure, there's nothing to be done, then they might be less likely to resist if they see something in it for themselves, right? So rewards are useful, might be useful in some contexts. Next is planning, right? A reform that is well planned might likely keep people happier, so that they do not resist it so badly. Finally, if nothing else works, of course there is coercion. People can be coerced, but coercion, although sometimes effective in the sense that it does bring about change, it does break resistance, it still has the negative this it has disadvantages, in the sense like people, they might retaliate, they might be aggressive, and yeah, but at least it is one of the ways to overcome resistance. Also, change can be managed, right? And there are several models that have been developed to manage change, and the most popular three models are Lewin's force field analysis, Kotter's 8-step plan, and Harris's 5-phase model. They are very intuitive if we go beyond those fancy titles, and so let's look at each of them in turn. Okay, so Kurt Lewin proposed the idea of force field analysis, and according to Lewin, any change involves driving forces and restricting forces, right? There is a balance of them, or if you wanna reduce tension and conflict, you have to increase the driving forces and reduce the restricting forces, right? So if you don't do that, tensions and conflict will increase. Okay, and according to Lewin, change involves a sequence of administrative processes that evolve over time, right? And the first process in the sequence is unfreezing, right? That's when you, as an administrator, reduce forces that keep the organization in its current state. The second process in this sequence is moving. Here, an administrator and the organization and overall develops new values, attitudes, and behaviors. And finally, after moving, you refreeze. You stabilize the change at a new quasi-stationary equilibrium. Why is it quasi-stationary? It's because, well, maybe you will have to unfreeze, move, and refreeze again. Okay. The next approach to managing change is Kotler's 8-step plan. Basically, it's based on Lewin's model. It's just more detailed. And let's say more, the steps in this plan kind of are more intuitive and more straightforwardly possible to to go ahead and apply. Okay, so the first step would be establish a sense of urgency. The second, create the guiding coalition. The third, develop a vision and strategy. The fourth step is to communicate the change vision. The fifth step is to empower broad based action. And the sixth step is to generate short term wins. In the seventh step, you want to consolidate gains and produce more change. And finally, you want to end up with anchoring new approaches in the culture. You can see really that this is pretty much the Lewin's force field analysis processes, just more detailed and more, more like instruction kind of worded in the form of instructions. Finally, there is Ben Harris's 5-phase model, and kind of similar. It's just it's possible that maybe this will appeal to you like more and maybe be more applicable in your particular context, right? So this phases, according to Harris, also come in sequential order, like two previous models, okay? But they might overlap. So these phases might overlap, so let's look at them. The first phase is planning and initiation. This is when you want to clarify purpose and goals of the change, select activities, consider resources. The second phase is momentum. Yeah, basically here, all of those activities that are directed towards the goal, they get underway. A lot of action is happening here. The third phase is problems. So one thing you want to know for sure, you will have problems when you are implementing change, right? So usually these activities from phase 2 lead to unexpected problems, and here leader involvement is crucial if you want your change to be managed well. Okay. After problems, there comes a turning point. Here, either problems keep growing or you and your team overcome and minimize those problems, okay? So if you overcome and minimize the problems, you're good to go. You keep going and your change is pretty much managed. If not, you enter the fifth phase, which is termination. And termination here refers to termination of effort to change things, right? So if task is too complex or there is a lack of resources or problems keep growing, impossible to solve, then you just terminate your effort. Yeah, your change process stops here. I think it's kind of very realistic, and in that sense, it's kind of different from this Lewin's and Kotter's models, because here you are kind of psychologically prepared for problems that usually arise absolutely in every reform process, and that there is hope, there is a turning point, but remember that you can end up by terminating your effort. Okay, let's move on to the concept of organizational development. So, organizational development is a set of social science techniques or interventions designed to plan and implement change in work settings, with the purposes of enhancing the personal development of individuals and improving the effectiveness of the organization, right? There are a lot of organizational development techniques or interventions designed, to plan and implement change, and some of them are designed to improve the performance of groups or the organization. They are called group approaches, right? This include total quality management, strategic planning, and survey feedback. Let's look at them in a little bit more detail. So total quality management, TQM, is based on the assumption that people want to do their best and that it is the management's job to enable people to do so, to do their best, right, by constantly improving the system in which people work. It's strongly associated with the name of Edward Deming. He designed a lot of things about TQM. And one thing, if you start reading TQM books, you might be puzzled, like, how does this apply to education, right? Because you'll read words like management, employees, product, customers, right? You will not read like, principals, teachers, or, academic outcomes, or parents, or other stakeholders, community members, right? But if you sort of translate these terms into, into their rough equivalents in the educational setting, then you will surprisingly find that total quality management can be very effectively applied in educational settings. So let's look at some of the principles of total quality management. This is just selected several principles. There are many more. I think this could illustrate very well that TQM can be applied in education, right? So one of the principles is to create constancy of purpose for improvement of product and service. Next, adopt the new philosophy. Next, create dependence on inspection to achieve quality, right? So remember, total quality management is based on the assumption that people want to do good. They want to do their best, right? So they are welcome. They welcome. They should welcome. The culture should welcome inspection because everybody wants to do better. Yeah. Okay. So hey, come on, inspector. Come on, check my work because I want to do better. Um, the next principle is improve constantly and forever every activity in the company to improve quality and productivity, right? Doesn't it sound really like you could translate into this into slogans of many schools, right? The next principle is institute training on the job. Teach people constantly, right? Institute leadership. Next, drive out fear. People should not be afraid to do things. They should not be afraid, otherwise, they will not be able to show their best. Break down barriers among staff areas. Okay, so this is really interesting approach for organizational development. The next one is strategic planning, and let's look at the steps involved in strategic planning. First, develop a mission. Second, conduct a critical analysis of internal environment. Third, conduct a critical analysis of external environment. Fourth, prepare planning assumptions. Fifth, develop a strategy. Sixth, communicate the strategy. Seventh, develop evaluation procedures. Eighth, implement the strategy. Nine, evaluate the results, right? This is really like a roadmap if you want to do and implement some strategic planning in your organization. Finally, there is this, another tool for organizational development, which is called survey feedback, and it is pretty much what the name is really like. It tells it all, right? So survey feedback is an organizational approach to change that involves collecting data from members of a work group or whole organization and then analyzing and summarizing that data into an understandable form. Yeah, then feeding back the data to those who generated it and using the data to diagnose problems and develop action plans for problem solving. Well, this is a very long definition, but basically the idea is pretty simple and intuitively understood. Let's have a look. So basically, if you want to implement survey feedback, right, there are some phases. First, you want to do preliminary planning. You plan what you're going to do, what you're going to study. Then you collect data, right? Usually through surveys, could be collected by other, social science data collection tools. Then leader preparation, you prepare the leader. You basically report the data analysis results to the leader of the organization. Then the leader conducts feedback meetings with specific departments, discussing, processing all those data analysis results, right? Next, here sort of the survey part kind of stops, but very important part begins after all those feedback meetings. Yeah, after the leader processed the information and talked about it with the specific departments, then they should develop action plans. To-do lists, things they want to change, right? And then they implement those plans and monitor and evaluate the reform. Another type of organizational development techniques is aimed at changing the individual, right? Called individual approaches, right? This include things like job enrichment, laboratory training, and behavioral performance management. So in practice, these approaches are used in combination, in order to make effective organizational reforms in educational organizations. Let's look at job enrichment, right? So the concept of job enrichment originated from Herzberg's motivation hygiene theory, who talked about, you remember motivation factors that keep us motivating and hygiene factors that prevent us from being dissatisfied, right? So job enrichment is a method emphasizing motivation factors while keeping hygiene factors present, right? So there are 5 job characteristics that are essential to qualify it as a job enrichment, right? The first is skill variety. A person should be able to use a variety of skills at the job. Next is task identity. That means basically the degree to which a job requires to do a whole and identifiable piece of work, right? Rather than just like a part on an assembly line, okay? Just rather than just a part of the piece of work, right? So the next is task significance. So a person should be doing something important, right? Autonomy. Means a person should be able to make some decisions on their own. There should be some autonomy involved in doing the job. And finally, job feedback means whether or not in the process of performing the job, an employee gets feedback. Not necessarily from a superior. It could be just in the process of work. This is very often like in teaching, right? Teachers get feedback. Not necessarily from their, like, I don't know, heads of departments or principals. They get feedback just by, for example, from the performance of students, from the way they behave in class, and another way. So the job itself provides feedback. The next approach is laboratory training. This is a little bit kind of less common in these parts, but quite common maybe in the US and in some other countries. So it's also known under the names of sensitivity training, or T groups, originated in 1946 and usually takes place in small groups but aims at individual change. People usually retreat somewhere. It doesn't happen in the workplace, right? And laboratories they are given this name: stranger, cousin, brother, family. Basically these words refer to whether or not people are from the same part of the organization, or whether or not they are from the same level of an organization, right? So yeah, so people get out, and usually after those trainings they can communicate better, they can overcome certain, maybe conflicts even, right, in interpersonal relations. So that usually helps people to develop. Finally, behavioral performance management. It is based on originally Skinner's theory of operant conditioning, and more recently on the social learning approach, right? And one of the most famous kind of models is Fred Luton's SOBC model. And basically what this is a process of changing the behavior of an employee by managing the consequences that follow his work behavior, right? So things like positive reinforcement and other things, all of those things, yeah, they emerged, they are utilized in this model.